Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Altmed podcast. Great to have you with us once again. With me, as always, my co-host Mitch Kurtz. How you doing, Mitch?
Hello. Yes, well, thank you.
And we've been looking forward to this one for a little while. We've had a few doctors on the show, but I think this might be breaking ground for Altmed. It's the first time we've actually had Doctor of the Year and People's Choice of Doctor, at least according to last year's Australian Cannabis Industry Awards. It is none other than GP Dr. James Stewart. James, thanks so much for joining us.
No worries. Pleasure to be here.
Very good to have you. Winning awards in the cannabis industry, it's pretty tough, but for people like us, it's always good to get together and gloat.
Yes, well done, guys. Congratulations on your award as well.
As per usual, in there, Mitch.
Well, if you've got it, flaunt it. Where's the little plaque? You can put it up, Andrew, on the video screen.
Mine's at work, otherwise
as per usual, I think just for everybody else out there who maybe isn't watching the Cannabis Industry Awards so avidly, it'd be great to know a little bit about your history to date, how you got into the space, how you found yourself doing cannabis, and being, Doctor of the Year, essentially.
Yeah. So I guess the interesting thing about me is how I actually came into doing medicine as a whole first. I guess it's probably interesting for some people. It's, I guess, a story of sort of two lives that I lived. Prior to going back to med school, I was actually a DJ and involved in the nightclub scene and that kind of thing, sort of right through teens.
So basically what you're saying is, James, I'm stuck on a call with two DJs, is really what you're saying.
That's it. Except, I would have played on vinyl. You probably wouldn't know what vinyl.
It's just CDs for me.
So I grew up in that kind of scene. Grew up on the Gold Coast. And partying and experimenting with certain things was sort of what we did now and then. And then when I got into the medical sort of field, my late 20s and then right through my 30s, I always just had in the back of my mind, that things that I'd done previously that were possibly considered maybe illegal, probably could have a role in medicine. And it sort of led me to think, well, why, especially cannabis, it's a plant. Why is this illegal? And then, so when it sort of, the hype sort of started coming around about medicinal cannabis potentially being able to be prescribed by practitioners, sort of 5 years ago, I sort of jumped online and just started looking into it and looking at, what studies had been done. There hasn't been a great deal done. And I guess I sort of just, jumped in and learned how to prescribe, and as a GP, I prescribed my first product probably 2.5, 3 years ago. It was a very clunky process. But then I just saw the benefits that patient got with sleep. Was the first one, was amazing. And so then I led it to another patient, and then I just started getting momentum with it. And now that's led to me doing, full-time, I'm a full-time cannabis clinician. I've stepped back from traditional GPing as such, just because I'm still treating the same conditions that I was treating as a GP, well, most of them, but just in a different way that is a lot more safe, less side effects, and one medicine can treat a whole raft of conditions. So I'm so happy that these two sort of random worlds of mine somehow merged together.
Yeah.
I haven't got the deck set up in my room.
Audio therapy.
No, it's such a great story. It must kind of blow your mind as well to be seeing beyond just cannabis, these studies being done into MDMA, psilocybin, magic mushrooms to treat longer term mental illnesses. Is it, if someone had told you that that's where we were going to be back when you were behind the decks, I don't know if you went under the name Dr. Stewart back then, but it's pretty crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I guess more so, it wouldn't, it was more, I was like, it's like, why isn't this medication is more the thought, you get back then, because of the feelings you get, and, the benefit you can see from it. It's like, why is this a medication? Who said this is illegal? What are the whole reason behind this is sort of the more thought I would have had. But yes, no, if someone told me when it was, I was 5 a.m. on the decks at monastery or somewhere in Brisbane, and I was going to be a doctor in how many years? I would have said, you've had too much of whatever you're having. Go away.
Yeah, that wasn't a clinical dose. yeah, understood. Amazing.
Yeah.
Okay. So in terms of the, talking about having done it for a while now, there might be other doctors out there that are coming into the space, don't understand as much about the process. How much has that process changed since you started, applying for, say, special access on behalf of patients and things like that? Is that, where you started in 2018, 19 versus now?
Yeah, I mean, it's easier now just because, I've done so many applications. So that whole SASB application portal just became a lot easier for me. And now we can get granted authorised prescribers for classes now. So we don't have to apply every time for an authority to the TGA. I guess I was kind of lucky early on. I had Matua and Ben Jansen from CDA. They kind of guided me a little bit on how to do my first application, that kind of thing. And then later on, I had Dr. Jim Connell from Heyday. He sort of helped me out as well along the way. So I had these guys just showing me how to do that first application, because initially it was like, holy moly, what do I do? Am I doing this right? And then it wasn't until someone showed me, and then I was like, okay. And it just became an easier process. And now with the, the authorised prescriber thing that we can apply for, it's becoming a lot easier. The reps out there are fantastic now for the companies. They all know how to guide you through your applications and that kind of thing. So there is a lot more help out there now to guide doctors on how to do the applications. But I guess the first, the thing for doctors that are kind of wondering is you just need to become familiar with a couple of simple products, just a couple of products, a CBD oil, a THC flower, a 50-50 oil, something like that, just to get you started. You can get overwhelmed by entering the space now because there are so many products out there, like it's crazy. But if you just learn the basics of kind of, CBD, what it's used for, and the rough dosing guide, fantastic. CBD is so safe, very minimal side effects, doesn't interact with anything. And that's just where you get started. And then once you're comfortable with that, go on to a 50-50 combination, CBD, THC. What does that benefit? What do we use that for? What's the dosing guide for that? And just gradually learn more and more. And before you know it, it's, you've got your head around it. And it's very easy from then on. And then you can see that this medication can just treat so many conditions at once, and you don't have to add another medication because of the side effects of this one. Yeah. Like you have to do with a lot of them. So it's just take the step,
a leap of faith.
Do a couple, get someone to guide you through it, and then you'll get rolling, and you'll be like, I should have done this a while ago.
It's interesting when you say it's so safe, coming from the mouth of the doctor. It's hard to understand why it's ever really been outlawed per se when you think of it in that way. I know you have some views on this, and would love to hear talking about a bit more of the history of cannabis. So I'd love to invite you to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, if you could just take us through the last, say, 80 years of cannabis regulation, that'd be great.
Well, I think that's about when it all sort of started. So cannabis is the oldest medicine documented on the planet. Okay, so right back to 2800 BC, Emperor Sheng of China, where it's sort of the cannabis originated. He's documented using cannabis, and he's the godfather of Chinese medicine. He used cannabis for a raft of different things, and it's documented then and right through with the Greeks.
Did he access it via special access scheme, or was that? I think he just walked out his door and grabbed a bit and then used it. So, and then you got even Queen Victoria. She used a cannabis tincture for menstrual cramps and that kind of thing. So it's this whole, however long we've been around and documented, cannabis has been there apart from the last sort of since 1925. I've got as sort of the point
where it started to get a bad name. So if you want, I'll talk you through, I've written down all the sort of key points, and I think it's really important because this will really put into perspective just how the current perception of cannabis as being an illegal, a gateway, an evil, a gateway drug to heroin and that kind of thing, how it's actually come about. And I would say it's just, cannabis has been very unlucky the whole way along with where it's been placed and what it's been linked with, that it's just ended up in this horrible place of being associated with heroin and cocaine. And it's nothing like that. It's nothing like that at all. It's not, you don't get addicted to it. It's nothing like that. So strap in. We'll go for a little walk through
Take
history.
us on the journey.
So
I'm excited.
Here we go. All right. Have you got any music for me, Mitch?
Well, I don't have any vinyl, if that's what you're asking.
Right. Okay, so let's go back to 1925. So there was a thing called the Geneva Convention. Okay, and this was a bit of a transnational drug control treaty designed to ban recreational use of opium and the cocoa plant. So opium, heroin, and cocoa, so into your cocaine. So what happened to this? They passed that legislation, but right at the end, one of the reps from Egypt came in and said, we need to add hashish to this because over in Egypt, there's an issue with chronic hashish use. Now, hashish is the resin from THC, and it's often extremely high the resin from cannabis, it's also often extremely high in THC. So he was saying that probably a few people in Egypt weren't getting a lot done because they were smoking hashish. So he's come across and said it needs to be linked as a narcotic. Now, narcotic, the word comes from ancient Greek, I think, which means to numb. So he wanted to put into this category of these numbing agents and to be put down as not for recreational use. It didn't get passed, but it started to be linked in with these other narcotics from then on. So then in 1930, this lovely chap called Harry J. Aislinger. Now you guys might know him. He pushed hard for the prohibition against alcohol early on. And then when he was unsuccessful with that, he turned his focus to cannabis. Now he started the establishment of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. And he started the media campaign of Reefer Madness, the evil, the doctor, the Satan's weed, this kind of thing. And I've got some good ones here. These are fantastic. Let's go with this one. So this is out of a paper clipping, and I'll read it to you. Beware, young and old people in all walks of life. This, and it's got a picture of a joint, may be handed to you by the friendly stranger. It contains the killer drug marijuana. Now, marijuana was a term, it's a Mexican Spanish term that was, when the Mexicans came through up from the bottom of the States, they said marijuana. So marijuana is now a bit of a derogatory term, so we never use marijuana anymore. But that's what he labeled all this as, marijuana. A powerful narcotic in which lurks murder, insanity, and death. Dose peddlers are shrewd. They may put some of this in your tea, and it's got a tea kettle there, or in the tobacco in your cigarette. So he's sweet with you smoking tobacco, but yeah, no, don't put any marijuana in it.
I love meeting friendly strangers.
This one's a beauty. It's got this doctor here's injecting what's meant to be marijuana. I don't know about doing that.
Straight flower, or
I think it's probably a bit of a tincture.
Haven't seen that method of administration before.
Weed with roots in hell, not recommended for children. What happens at marijuana parties? Weird orgies, wild parties, and unleashed passions.
I mean, sounds terrible.
The person who wrote that has not used cannabis before.
No wonder it was big in the Greco-Roman times.
Yeah. Then it's got like a claw crime, hate, shame, despair. So this is just what's been thrust into media at the start of the 1930s. Okay, so anyone growing up then is this marijuana. But what's going on behind the scenes is that no one put marijuana and linked it to cannabis, which was still being used by the doctors. They were still prescribing cannabis. You could still go and buy it over the counter, but all of a sudden there's this big fear tactic about marijuana, which people didn't realize was the same thing until a bit later on. So then in 1937, the Marijuana Tax Act came in. So this is actually really funny because pork cannabis, okay, has now got stuck on the side of marijuana. This guy who's just got a bee in his bonnet because he didn't get alcohol banned, so he's gone on to marijuana, which, you know, I still think, you know, let's consider marijuana as, you know, street cannabis kind of stuff, the stuff that, you know, we think is illegal. But then you've got cannabis underneath, which is still being used as medicine. And then you've got the other side of cannabis, which is hemp. Now, hemp is, let's just say for simple terms, cannabis without THC in it. Okay, let's just say it's that plant. So that is a fantastic textile. We all know it's amazing. I mean, the first fleet bought seeds out, all the sales were all made with hemp and that kind of thing. What happened at this same time in 1937, okay, is with the Marijuana Tax Act. This was being pushed by three notable people, okay? There's the newspaper magnate Rudolph Hearst, okay? And he had a large investment in timber holdings. Funny that. So he prints his newspaper on paper, and he happens to have a lot of the holdings in the company that produces paper. The Secretary of Treasury, and who was the wealthiest man in the States at that time, Andrew Mellon, and a family called the DuPont family. Now, they had just invented a thing called nylon, and Andrew Mellon happened to invest in nylon. So they were trying to bring nylon around to compete with hemp. So these guys were pushing this more so to get people away from using hemp as a fiber and a paper and a, you know, everything instead of nylon. And then you had the media, the scare campaign coming in about marijuana, and all it's, and, you know, and you've just got cannabis underneath, which is was used as a medicine that's just happened to be latched into this as well. So the AMA caught wind of this because they didn't realize that what they were saying as marijuana was actually the cannabis that they were giving their patients. So they caught wind of this, but it was too late. They didn't have time to put the opposition bill in, and it got passed through. Now, the AMA president, that's the Australian American Medical Association, the president at the time, Dr. William Woodward, he said there's no evidence of addiction, violence, or overuse. And he's quoted saying this, marijuana is not even the correct term. Yet, the burden of this bill you are passing is placed heavily on the doctors and pharmacists of this country. It will stagnate the medical use of this plant. And we can see he was pretty spot on, because when this got passed, everything just went underground. We had no more studies. So that's up to the 1937, 1940, the marijuana tax. Again, the marijuana thing just was funny. So around this time in the US, the government sent a sheet to the Federal Bureau in Australia, and it was from the narcotics team that our mate Aislinger was involved with, and it labelled the Mexican drug that causes madness, marijuana. So just after they got this, a major Australian newspaper ran the article on the Mexican drug, and under the influence, the addicts become at time almost an uncontrollable sex maniac. Why do you keep linking it to sex? Like,
goodness me. That
I
is,
don't know.
yeah, wow.
Well,
in your clinical experience, have you ever
Viagra, I take it.
Have you ever treated somebody for say loss of sexual
libido?
Yeah, libido.
Maybe I might see. I don't know if that classifies as a case yet with the TGA, but I might put special consideration and
Oh dear.
It's amazing too. Sorry, just to interrupt for one thing. I just how you talk about this term marijuana catching on from the Mexicans coming through Southern America, and it's amazing how we still live with the consequences of that, even in an era where things have been legalized in Australia for the last 5 or so years. We're still in a situation where people will refer to it as medical cannabis. No one ever says, I'm looking for a doctor that will prescribe me marijuana. So that is still obviously the dirty way.
Depends on the age of the person.
Yeah,
so my
true.
parents, my parents were both above 80, and Dad, before he passed away, he used to say, get the marijuana, Jay's prescribing the marijuana and I'm like, Dad, it's not the marijuana.
Yeah.
And people in that age bracket, because they've been, bombarded with this stuff, is still think of it as marijuana, or the marijuana cigarette that they got.
Did you tell him it's not marijuana, it's devil's lettuce?
Yeah,
devil's lettuce. Yes,
he probably thought you were all your patients were sex maniacs as well. But anyway,
yeah.
That was before he became a doctor. Sorry.
All right.
Plain you lot. All right. And then so after that was published in the Australian newspaper, a few weeks later, there was another article about a marijuana cigarette had been smoked at a party in Sydney. I don't know if there was much sex going on at that party, but that made the news that someone smoked a marijuana cigarette.
Oh no.
And then so, yeah, and then so, but at this time, while marijuana was being perceived in the public as this evil thing, the doctors here were still prescribing cannabis to patients, and you could still buy it over the counter. But it wasn't until a few years later when the perception of marijuana linked with cannabis, and patients no longer wanted cannabis anymore because they thought they were going to have wild sex orgies. Thought demand might actually have gone up in some areas if that was the case.
Do we know what doctors were generally prescribing for back in those days?
Well, I think the same thing we're prescribing for now.
Yeah.
So pain, anxiety, nausea, all these to sleep. I think all the things that it's documented for and all the things we now know it works for, I'm assuming that's what they were prescribing it for because it works. And, I think you could buy it over the counter as well because I guess they saw that it was safe, relatively safe. So, yeah. But anyway, so then up until 1940, you following me so far?
Yeah, I'm on the timeline.
So 1942. So 1942, up until this point, it was still listed in the pharmacopoeia of medicines in the States. But at this time, it was the advent of the single molecule synthetic drugs came into play, and these big pharmaceutical companies then introduced these to be, because it's a single molecule, they said it's more effective, easier to control, more predictable, and less side effects because it's a single molecule. And so I guess this is the start when plant medicine is such, because we all know about the entourage effect, and it's similar things with plants being that as a whole, the plant works better as a medicine than taking out separate parts. And so this whole idea that plant medicines work on all of a sudden became pushed aside, and plant medicine lost favoritism because you can't control it. There's too much going on. We don't know what molecules doing what. And then doctors started being trained this. And I know going through med school as well, we were sort of, plant medicine's all a bit woo, there's no evidence. We don't know what's doing it. And so this became ingrained in medicine. We grew up, doctors were trained, single molecule, there's been studies on them, they're very safe and no side effects. But as we now know, that's not quite the case. So the prohibition and the doctors no longer prescribing and the ban on drugs, this actually led to the cannabis area marijuana going underground. And so when it went to the black market, underground market, the ones that were manufacturing it then just pushed high THC. That's all they wanted. So they only made plants that were high in THC. Going on, let's go to skip forward to the 60s and 70s. Okay, so for the last sort of from the 40s to the 60s, that thing, cannabis has been pushed underground. It was an illegal substance, that kind of thing. 60s and 70s, we've got the hippie movement, okay, and we've got the protest, etc., all that kind of thing. And at this time, cannabis became a bit of a symbol of counterculture, a drug for rejecting the enriched values in our society. So cannabis got linked. So these people, it wasn't cannabis that was causing them to do the rallies. These people had enough of war that was going on. They'd had enough of the corporations. They were kind of sticking it to the man by rallying and that kind of thing. And cannabis just happened to be there with them. It wasn't the cannabis causing it, but cannabis got linked to this whole, you're a dropout, you're against the way we should be doing things. And this was actually, enforced with Nixon and the whole war on drugs. So he had a big issue with people against war, and he couldn't make it illegal to be against war, but he could make it illegal to use cannabis, marijuana, which, a lot of the people were using at the time. So this is where that whole, stigma around it being for dropouts, being for deadbeats, being for no-hopers, it came about because, people in normal society were looking at these hippies protesting and, for a good reason, we don't want bloody war, but it got associated with being, you're a dropout, you don't have a job, you smoke cannabis, you're a no-hoper, you're not going anywhere. And that's where that, all sort of came about.
Yeah.
And it is Nixon too, historically, just the that flashpoint where the tide of public opinion was starting to turn against the Vietnam War. I know sort of initially when it commenced in the early to mid 60s, there was support, and then when that started to wane, and younger people were protesting both here in Australia and over in the US, Nixon, wanted to control the population and wanted to silence those people speaking out against his government's military efforts in Vietnam. And so this was the perfect tool to deploy. And boy, have we paid the price ever since.
Yeah, and at the same time as that, we had over here we had like Premier Joh Bjelke-Petersen and
was it Bolte in Victoria, maybe the Premier at the time?
Yeah, and Robert, company in New South Wales, they were fully supportive of Nixon because we were in the state's pocket, helping them, sending troops over to Vietnam, so they didn't want anyone being anti-war as well, and so therefore they all on board.
I think in that same year of 1967 was the last time someone was hanged in Victoria at the Premier's direction. So yeah, we're dealing with very conservative governments back at that.
Was that because
time.
of cannabis?
Wasn't for cannabis, but it was,
out of hemp rope.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So this is what you can see how it's just being painted like. They've just associated it with things. It got associated with narcotics, it got associated with heroin, and yes, which is horrible, heroin and cocaine. And then it got associated with being against, against our social norms, causing it to drop out. And it's just been associated with things it shouldn't have been associated with. So
what you're saying is, when we started talking about China, just that evolution from it being considered really as just a medicine, and it has just been dragged into socio-political, cultural, all sorts of spheres that, maybe there's an opportunity to have a discussion about cannabis in those circles. But the fact is that though it got to such a point that those influences actually prevented it from being used for health reasons. That's really the core point, isn't it?
Yeah. And it kind of went on, two different paths, because you had marijuana going on this evil, perceived as being this evil thing, but cannabis, it's all the same thing. Cannabis underneath was still medicine. But the thing that happened with marijuana was it ended up becoming very high in THC. And that's when people, may have experimented once in the, teens or something like that, and had a horrible experience with it, because no doubt they got something off the street that was super high in THC, probably some hydro something, and just greened out or spent the rest of the party in the shower throwing up kind of thing. And so since then, they've got the perception that, it is true, it is the evil, bloody the devil's lettuce, because I felt horrible. It's like, okay, it's not quite right. You've had, like, if you had your first drink of alcohol and you had a bottle of absinthe, you're going to feel bloody terrible because you got the strongest stuff on the shelf. And you're not used to it. So
and then that also, on a side note, takes me to this point where sometimes I look at what happens in the States a little bit at the moment, and I actually don't necessarily agree with the levels, like dabbing, the having the resin basically in a smokable form, where they're smoking like hundreds or thousands of milligrams of THC in one hit, and that's the equivalent of like drinking isopropyl or something like that,
getting it
80 proof, 180.
And that's just the thing, there's no
injecting the flower.
I've got a picture of that. There's no doubt that there are harms from it, and that the high doses like this, and back in the Geneva Conference, when the fella came over from Egypt and said, these people are stuffed over here, that's because they're using the high strength stuff. So you can't categorize the whole of cannabis into this one very small, segment of it being misused or too high for the person to use.
I had no idea that it came from Egypt, by the way, the sort of the beginning of considering cannabis as a narcotic.
Yeah, so they got there, and then they got support from Turkey of all places.
Wow!
Right,
and then I think the Italians and the South Africans jumped on board as well. But that bill didn't get passed anyway. But since then, everyone associated it as a narcotic.
So
a lot of that was coming out of
Egypt
Morocco.
had sort of planned pyramid construction that just wasn't on time. Basically, they're just all the builders were just chilling out. No, anyway,
that's what I reckon. Yeah, they weren't getting much done. Well, it's funny. There's another story back in the 1800s. I think Napoleon, he tried to have something similar banned because his army weren't very effective.
They keep surrendering.
Just wanted to go and hug and just have something to eat.
Yeah.
Oh, very good.
Sorry,
right, we're at Nixon's war on drugs.
We're at Nixon's war on drugs. So so he actually in 1972, he got marijuana placed as a Schedule 1 category drug, so the same as heroin and cocaine. He got it officially put into there pending on a commission. So he put this commission. So based on pending of the commission came back with a report and unanimously recommended decriminalising the possession distribution for personal use. So they just went completely, they said, no, this is, he ignored that and still put it into that category as a category 1. So that's how it's officially been put in with heroin and these other nasty ones. Then we get Jimmy Carter coming along. So 1977, through the Senate Judiciary Committee, he voted to decriminalise marijuana. Now, this was good, so it started to come back, but because what was being available was still this underground high potency THC, and then you've got people, first-time users using this stuff, plus you've got the overall fear in society that's been around this, that it didn't last very long and it got criminalised again after a couple of years. So it made its way in a little bit, but then people were seeing the negative effects of it more so than the positive effects, and it got criminalised again. So you find that there has been a few through history. There are these little things where it's been almost back in and then something's happened and it's got out. So 1980s, Ronald Reagan came in and he continued the war on drugs, and specifically he was focusing on crack cocaine over in the States with the African Americans. But cannabis, marijuana was still linked with this. So every time there was a campaign to get people off the crack, marijuana was always associated with it. And the same continued out here in Australia. So marijuana has just been tagged onto heroin and crack along there. So that's in the 1980s. So from the 1980s, up until now, there's always been movements, pop-ups, campaigns to try and reduce or decriminalise cannabis. Even as recently in 1995, Jeff Kennett, Premier of Victoria, he established the Premier's Drug Advisory Council, and he voted that charges that have been previously given to someone for small amounts of cannabis, the possession of small amounts of cannabis, should be removed from the person's criminal history, and a person should no longer be charged with possession of a small amount for personal use. This didn't go through because the argument was, well, if this gets through, then we'll have to do it for cocaine and for heroin. So that's where we're at. So it's just
I've got a tale for that one, as in just an addendum. It's crazy the timing, but I got an email just before we jumped into this meeting from Fiona Patton. So another a contemporary member of the Victorian Parliament, and basically her party Reason has just introduced a bill into the Victorian Parliament that effectively would see Victoria following in Portugal's footsteps in decriminalising all drugs in small quantities, and it's just amazing that this is where we are. So that bill is being debated in Victoria on the 9th of March, 2022 this year. And it's just gone on for decades and decades. So I don't know, just going through this sort of historical journey with you and sort of seeing that that's where we are now, at least in Victoria. I mean, it is crazy how many roadblocks have been unnecessarily imposed, cannabis and other things. But, hopefully we might actually be starting to see common sense prevail here. But, I can't talk too soon.
Yeah, and it just, again, it's just associated with the horrible drugs like heroin. Like that's the thing. And it's just people automatically associate it. You smoke cannabis. okay, you're onto the hard drugs as well. You're a burden to society, blah, blah, blah. And it's not the person's fault. That's the views that have been pushed on them. That's what they've grown up to learn. And, it's hard to try and change that perception, but, just sort of going through that history there, you can just see how it's just been an unfortunate event of circumstances that have just, cannabis has just got on with it. It's got mixed in with a bad crowd, I guess you could say.
Yeah. And
Absolutely.
as a doctor, how do you compare that, say, like when we're talking about cannabis, harder drugs, to say alcohol or sugar, for example?
Yeah, I know. Yeah. So alcohol is a big one. I don't drink anymore. I had a bit of a problem with it. I couldn't have one. I'd end up having 6 and then I'd be out and it'd be going all night. So I don't drink anymore. And since I stopped, it's funny how you realize how just ingrained in our culture alcohol is. Alcohol is so much worse for us than cannabis. Hands down by a mile. No one has, the deaths from cannabis is you can't overdose from cannabis. You don't, other things from alcohol, you then goes into gambling, it goes into relationships, it goes into domestic violence, all these type of things. Yet it's part of our social norm. Like for me, that's one that is just really like, if for someone to me, if they say, oh, you're a cannabis prescriber, I say, well, do you have a drink in the afternoon? Yes. Okay. Well, what's the difference from you getting home and having, 3 or 4 beers to someone not doing that and maybe having a cannabis tea or an oil or a vape? Just to relax. What's the difference? I guarantee you that person having the cannabis is going to be more relaxed, not going to go out, not going to spend money, not going to abuse the partner. We've got so alcohol just is one, and I think people are realizing now that it shouldn't be as big as it should be. It's on all the ads, that kind of thing. And then other ones that we don't even think about that are more harmful than cannabis is coffee.
I was going to say coffee. Yeah.
Coffee. So I actually looked this up. So coffee, where did I find it? Sorry. So coffee is a plant, comes from a plant, that we know. And studies show it can improve mood, a stimulant, and can be used for relief from headaches. Okay, so it's got some documented benefits, but unlike cannabis, it's addictive and it has the unwanted side effects of caffeine-induced anxiety, caffeine withdrawal, caffeine-reduced sleep disorders. And it's now, all of those are recognised as part of the DSM-5 category. So something as simple as how many coffee shops are there out there? Who needs their daily coffee? Oh, don't talk to me about my coffee. You don't have one, you get a headache. Like, this is a drug. This is a drug that is more harmful, more addictive than cannabis, and it doesn't have anywhere near the medical benefits that cannabis does.
Well, I don't even hear people talking. I hear people comparing the harm from alcohol and cannabis. I don't even hear people meriting a spot for coffee in the conversation about a harm reduction profile. Yeah.
Sugar.
And sugar merits a spot there.
Yeah, here we go.
10 grams of sugar. You get 10 teaspoons of sugar and just drink that. That's and then, the biggest killer in all Western is cardiovascular disease, diabetes, obesity, all these things that come around from sugar. You walk into a 7-Eleven or get your fuel at one of the servos, it's just lined with sweets, soft drinks, this kind of thing. That's what's killing people. It's crazy. Like
it's also I just find the ideological jump that some people might have to do to sort of engage in a more nuanced debate is to sort of understand that if we were to look on a chart to see the harm profile of all of these different substances that we're talking about, and they're out there, vary in the way that they are interwoven into our lifestyle. But, coffee, sugar, alcohol, cannabis, for some people, medicinal, but then also prescription drugs. If you look at all of those things, it's a little bit, I think it's hard for some people to make the shift where they basically say, whatever the government tells me is legal is fine. Yep. And whatever's easily accessible. So, if there's no warnings that come with sugar or anything, then it's completely fine. You know what I mean? And so then I've recently kind of, in accepting that that's the way that some people think, have realized that this is a failure on the part of our parliaments, that they haven't been able to. They're the ones charged with regulating. They haven't been able to bring everyone along for a more nuanced discussion about actually what harms us and what, you know, it has a direct impact upon how long we're here for. You know, that's kind of what it comes down to.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. And I think, you know, a lot of the argument against it is they say, well, there's no evidence to provide for the fact that it's safe or efficacious. But on the flip side, wouldn't you need evidence that it was harmful in order to schedule it, especially as an S8?
Yeah. So I think, again, it got lumped in with the people using cannabis may also be using harder drugs, may be for lower socioeconomic involved in crime. And, it got lumped in there again with those statistics that, cannabis causes,
Sure, but don't we choose our narcotic, scheduling based on actual risk profile to your health?
Yeah, but I remember, Mitch, it's
gone.
Because, well, I just remember how when the federal government responded to, they had I think it was a Senate committee that looked into issues around accessing medical cannabis. And as part of that inquiry, there was a discussion around, why is everything but CBD considered Schedule 8? And they said, well, because we don't have enough safety data on the use of minor cannabinoids as a medicine. So basically, in the absence of that data, they've made the call to say, well, it's cannabis, therefore it's probably going to be bad, or at least it could be risky, when in fact we know that, THC is really the only, intoxicating psychoactive compound within the plant. So, all these minor cannabinoids, at least in my opinion, should be treated as Schedule 4 at most. But, it's so there's, and then so it's a double-edged. It's like you get told, well, there's not enough safety data on it. But, really it's difficult to actually go ahead and find investors that will invest in clinical trials to do that safety data. So until that happens, we're sort of stuck with it.
So James, it's an interesting position for you as a GP and a prescriber. You're almost saying, take it away from me to have jurisdiction over whether people get access to this. Is that kind of correct in a way?
Sorry, take it away from me.
Oh, sorry. So take away people having to come to you to get cannabis is kind of the position I'm almost getting from you. In a way.
So no, you still need guidance on dosages, concentrations, and that kind of thing. So like we've discussed, THC is the one that's the psychotropic effects and that kind of thing. So we've got to be careful with the use of that in certain populations. CBD, I think, should be easily accessible. I don't think you should need a authority to get CBD. I think it's even safer than Panadol, definitely safer than Nurofen in terms of gastric upset and that kind of thing. We still need some guidance around THC and and certain strengths and that kind of thing. But I think definitely a CBD predominant medication or product, I think it should be safe for people to get. Because what I've seen in my years, it's very, very safe. There's very rarely any side effects. Obviously, we don't have any true long-term studies yet, of people just starting on daily CBD and that kind of thing. But
so would you be in support of something more like the European model at the moment, where you can literally get CBD over the counter at Aldi, not even over the counter at a pharmacy? I'm talking about online from, wherever. And then THC would still be regulated as something as a prescription only medication.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. Or, or if there were products out there, if it got to the day where we could have flower legal, then it would be regulated on certain THC strengths, I think would be the way to go.
So maybe you might have a low dose THC that's available or something.
50 CBD, THC flower or something like that.
Interesting.
I like it.
It's just funny on those with the opioids and with the the prescriptions and that kind of stuff that we do. So the latest figures for drug-induced deaths, okay, that came out, and mind you, in the drug-induced deaths, they don't include alcohol or cigarettes for some reason, which to me are both drugs and cause probably the most amount of death. But anyway, so opioids, 61% of drug-induced deaths, sedatives, 51%, antidepressants, 30%. The top three, that doesn't add up to 100, does it? But the top three anyway are the three that GPs prescribe.
Yeah.
Well, you put a marker down for, it's a shame I have to run, but I was going to say, James, I think that would be the perfect spot to kick off for a part 2, because I want to unpack, as with you as a doctor, some of the pushback that we see from traditional medicine in this country. So I'm just going to ambush you right now and say we're going to have another follow-up to this chat in the next few months.
Yeah, no worries at all. And I probably should say that, I'm not endorsing people to go out and smoke cannabis, go and get stuff off the street and smoke cannabis. Okay, I'm not endorsing that at all. I'm saying come and find doctors like myself, other doctors. There's a lot of good ones out there that we can talk to you and guide you through a treatment. And you don't have to smoke out of a bong to have cannabis. Okay, it's not this sitting in a dungeon. It comes in oils, it comes in rubs, it comes in capsules.
You can inject it.
You can inject
it. Orgies.
Indeed. No, that's been great, James. I'm really looking forward to our next part to this as we delve into current views in the health sector around cannabis. But it's been a pleasure, and thank you so much for chatting to us, at least about the history. Looking very much forward to our next one.
No worries, guys. Thanks for having me on, and we'll speak again soon.
We put you on the spot now, so you can't say no.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you know where I am now. So
yeah. Thanks, James. Looking forward to the next one.
Thanks, James.
See you guys.
Cheers.
Ciao.
Cheers.